I'm going to turn my phone off. So give people a couple more minutes. We're straight up at 10 o'clock. So I wanted to focus today on the listing forms that aren't used very often, because we have had a couple of circumstances come up recently that we have had to use these in a couple of instances. So I'm going to go ahead and review everything with you guys. I'm going to share my screen. You guys see the right of first refusal?
Yes.
Okay. So this is used most often. I've seen it used when neighbors got together and one neighbor thought he might want to buy the property. And so they did a first right of refusal so that if and when the seller decided to put this property on the market, their neighbor had the first option to purchase the property. Now, if someone comes to you as a broker and wants you to write up a right of first refusal, we don't have a form for that, and that's acting as a lawyer. So you just need to tell them to go to a lawyer to draft that up, because there are a lot of negotiations around that. And it should include what price will the neighbor buy it? How long of a notice does he have to decide to buy it if the seller decides to put it on the market? Just terms like that need to be outlined, and it really needs to have a lawyer draft it up. So if you get a listing and they say, yeah, I went in with my neighbor and he's got the right of first refusal. So you need to understand the terms of that and how it'll impact you. But you also need to have this included in your listing agreement documents that says, okay, this is part of my listing agreement with you. It is subject to the neighbor or whoever buying it as a right of first refusal. And that you understand that I'm going to be marketing the property and I may receive an offer that triggers the right of first refusal exercise. So if that happens during the term of our listing agreement or during the tail period after the listing agreement expires and our agreement is still in play here, then the seller will pay my compensation as we've set forth in the listing agreement, as though the offer was accepted and closed in accordance with the term. So that, in other words, he still owes you compensation. Just because they have a right of first refusal doesn't mean that he doesn't owe you compensation for listing property, because now you're going to work with them to write up the offer, make sure it's documented and escrowed, and that all the milestones of the offer is in play. So you're still representing the seller. And if that buyer that had the right of first refusal is represented by a buyer broker, then they are also entitled to compensation based on what we've done with the brokerage firm listing agreement. Does that make sense? Personally, I have never had this situation. I've had a couple of instances where there was a first right of refusal, but the person holding it decided not to proceed with the purchase. So I've never had to use it. If the circumstances happen, you do need to document it as part of your listing agreement. Any questions about that?
Yeah, if there's a right of first refusal and the property goes on the market, and we have this form in there, and the person who owns the right decides not to buy it, then what do we do?
You're still
Is
marketing.
there, do we just get rid of this form, or is there a document?
No, it stays in play. It's just documenting up front with the listing agreement how you're going to handle a first right of refusal. But if the neighbor or whoever it is decides not to purchase it, that they don't exercise their right of first refusal, then you're just marketing the property just like normal.
How will I be noticed or notified if the person who owns the right decides not to purchase it?
Well,
Does
it
he
should
just call
be,
me up and say, no, I don't want it?
well, they'll tell the seller. Because you're not managing the first refusal situation. You're just documenting that one exists. It's between the seller and that other buyer to communicate on, is this going to go forward or not? So your seller needs to communicate that with you.
So it just evaporates
Mhm.
if the guy doesn't want to buy it.
Yeah, it just doesn't apply. I
Okay.
would advise your seller to get it in writing that he is not exercising his right of first refusal.
And we don't have a form for that.
We do not, no. And again, that should have been in the terms of how the lawyer first drafted the right of first refusal
Okay.
between parties.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Alex.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. Okay, so I came in a few minutes late. I apologize. I
Okay.
am trying to piece together in what situation this would be used. I know you mentioned a neighbor. I understand the basis of right of first refusal, but this would happen if you're going to get a listing and then they said, hey, just so you know, our neighbor is going to have the right of first refusal. You're marketing the property as normal. And then if an offer comes in, then you have to give that to the neighbor, let's say.
Yes, you have to that triggers his first right of refusal.
If
So
an
you
offer
work-
comes in.
Yeah, you just work with your seller to let that first refusal buyer know that he needs to make a decision.
And as a buyer, if I'm going into a listing that has a Form 1R, would I be notified of that as a buyer or?
Yes, it's in the MLS. You have to disclose if there's a first right of refusal.
Okay, so I just haven't
I think
seen
it's
that
on
yet, so you
the,
have to disclose that.
I think it's on the listing input forms.
Okay,
I've never seen it, honestly.
you've never seen it. Okay, that's
Never
good. That's
seen
good.
it, but I wanted you to be aware of it.
Yes. Okay, so have you ever used this?
I have not.
Okay. Okay, cool. So I'm taking notes, but this one is like,
Yeah.
I don't need to get into the nitty gritty.
You don't. It's rare, but I want you to be aware of it if it does happen.
Yes, that's awesome.
Okay. Any more questions on that one?
Yeah, so all we need to do is get it in writing that the option is not accepted.
It's not being exercised, correct?
Yeah, that's all we need to do is just get that in writing.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. And honestly, the proper way to do that is tell your seller, look, this is a legal matter. You need to consult a lawyer to make sure that this is done properly, but we need it in writing that they are not exercising their right of first refusal,
Perfect.
because we don't have a form for that. This is more a disclosure thing for us with the listing. Okay, so we're gonna move on to 6, which is the green building. So as we are entering or have been in a more normal market, anything we can do to set our listings apart from their competitors is a good thing. And I know a lot of folks probably don't use the green building or the accessibility forms because they think it's maybe more complicated or it needs a special certification. It really doesn't. You're just disclosing any aspects of the property that are green or accessible. So this would be a supplement to the MLS, and you are required to upload it into the supplements in Northwest MLS. You'll get dinged if you check on your listing input form that you've got green aspects to this property if you don't have this form uploaded. So anything from, bamboo flooring, we see a lot of bamboo flooring. I've seen cork. If there's floor insulation, that's pretty common. If they're native plants in your landscaping, if you've got rain barrels or a rain garden. if you've got a wildlife habitat cert. Anytime you've got landscaping that's more natural with, and, what's the word? With the local plants that are natural here versus outside. You should flag that. Moving you guys around a little bit. Construction, I haven't seen any earth bermed buildings out here, but I'm sure there probably are. Insulated concrete, SIPs. I don't know what rain screen is. I've seen some straw bale houses though. Double walls, you know, anything special about the framing of the home. Windows, we're seeing more low E, triple pane, Energy Star. The ductless mini splits are very energy efficient. HEPA filtration, if you've got high efficiency, and it's gotta be 90%. So when you talk to an HVAC guy, they can tell you if any of these apply. Hot water recirculation, so it's more of an efficient use of a hot water heater. Radiant floor heating, solar hot water, anything related to that. On the test scores, these are more, you know, engineered and professionally certified energy performance score, what they are. EPS, I'm not sure. I haven't used these before, but I have seen a home energy rating system occasionally marketed. If you are close to public transit stops, it's pretty cool. We've got several of those homes in Port Townsend, and I don't know about, probably not Oak Harbor so much. Energy source, geothermal, if you're tied to the grid with solar, if you're off grid with a battery backup, passive solar. I mean, you've got a lot of options here. Same way, I mean, a lot of our listings have dual flush toilets, low flow toilets, faucets, shower heads. So I think our listings would more often qualify for these than we think.
So in order to qualify for this, let's just say you have one thing, right? My house has dual flush toilets. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that qualify?
Yeah, it's right there.
Okay.
Dual flush
So as
toilet.
long as you have one thing, it is not required, but you can fill this out to give more information to potential
Yeah,
buyers.
it's not your job to certify. You're just disclosing what Energy Star appliances you have or what low flow toilets you have. If you got a heat pump, I mean, a lot of these, you don't have to have a box checked in every single one of these things. So,
And it's not required. This is just extra information.
right,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's just beneficial if you care about doing it, but you don't have to do it.
Yeah, and it could set your listing apart from the others, because more and
Yeah.
more people are focused on green and energy efficient homes. So I think very few of our brokers in our area are actually using this. So it could set you apart. See,
Yeah.
this is for informational purposes only. Buyer is responsible for verifying the information. So.
I mean, if you know what the listing has, it's just, why would you not do it? It probably doesn't take that long.
Exactly. It's just another piece of paper that you upload into the MLS.
And is there a signature you need on it?
No.
So, is there no signature? Sorry, I made it really big so I could actually read it. I would be surprised. I would have the seller initial it. No, there's
If we're
no
putting it in a package,
line.
just have them initial it. Yeah.
I would. That's my advice. Yeah,
Yeah, this is
it's
great.
just informational. Interesting.
This is great. I feel like it makes you seem like a better listing agent, and it also makes you seem like a better buyer's agent because you're like, ooh, look at this listing. It's got this extra info. That's exciting.
Yeah. So that's the green building. Any questions about this? And
Yeah,
again,
Jen, is there a description of what some of these things mean?
We don't need to know what they mean necessarily, as long as the seller is telling us that they have them. And generally, if a seller is proud of his EPS carbon, he's gonna have that data available for you. So no, it's not, just like with the seller disclosure, we're not responsible for defining whether the seller has this or not. So this is more informational from the seller's perspective. Okay. Any more questions about that? All right, we're gonna go on to the accessibility form. Very similar, informational purposes only, buyers responsible for verifying. I think a lot of us are not using this as much as we could too, especially in our area. So is there an accessible route from the garage to the street? Meaning no steps. Is there accessible from garage to home interior? That's more rare, but I've seen it. Exterior curb cuts. This is mostly for folks that, you know, have wheelchairs or walkers that need assistance. If the garage door opening is 6'8" by or greater, if you've got level parking or room for a ramp. Covered entry is nice. Again, you don't have to have every single box checked to qualify for this accessibility. You're just disclosing that it's there. Minimum 5-foot turning radius, sidewalks, hard surface pathway. Doorways with 32 inches at least. Peephole and a lower peephole. Again, this is talking about the accessible entrance to the home. Common areas, central living, 36-inch pathway through the central area. If you got no carpeting or low pile, so it doesn't impede wheels or trip up folks with mobility issues. Switches need to be between 18 and 48 inches above the floor. And any doors need to be at least 32 inches wide. No flooring height changes between rooms, so you don't have a sunken living room with steps. And again, this is the central living common area. Then you go into the bedroom. So if you've got at least one bedroom with this information that's qualified, you can choose to use it. Same thing, a lot of lowered switches, window controls within 40 inches of the floor, closet bars adjustable, 36-inch pathway into the bedroom. The door is at least 32 inches wide. Pocket doors, double doors. And if you have at least one accessible bathroom. This is probably a little harder because with a bathroom, you've got to have a 60-inch turning radius. So that's going to be a fairly large bathroom. Roll-in showers, pocket doors, 32-inch wide door opening. If you got grab bars by the toilet or a lifted toilet, stalled control faucet, counters between 32 and 34. You know, a lot of our homes have these features. Now we're moving to the kitchen. So counter height is a deal. If you got a sink with knee and foot under the counter, raised toe kicks, buttons and knobs on the stove and microwave that are easy to manipulate. Side open oven door. I've seen one of those in the listing before. Accessible outlets. Raised dishwasher. Again, it's going to have to be a 60-inch turning radius to qualify for that. 36 feet pathway. Shelves 48 or pull down. So again, it's not for us to judge. This is for the seller to fill out with that information. Utility room. Front load washer dryer. I was reading over these and it was surprising to me how many of our listings would qualify for this kind of thing. And we're not even putting it in front of the seller to market that way. Hearing and vision, so a visual doorbell, different colors to make folks it more visible between work surfaces and the backsplash, lighting that's adjustable, visual and audible cues, smart house features. A lot of our houses have these now, and a visual smoke and fire alarm, which means it doesn't just go off audibly, it flashes a light. Open floor plans. We've got a lot of open floor plans. Buttons and knobs instead of the flat panel. A talking thermostat, peephole on the front door, et cetera, et cetera. If you've got an elevator or a lift, and some of our homes do, but our condos definitely do. So a lot of them do. I shouldn't say all of them, but if you've got a lift or an elevator in a condo, you should definitely put this up here. And a ceiling track. I have not seen tracks installed in any of my listings or in our area. But this is more if you've got, you've got a lift for someone to help them out of bed or help them into the bathroom. That I have not seen. Smart technology, which we're seeing more and more of. And for service dogs, guide dogs, fenced yard or dog run with an accessible route to the backyard.
It's interesting that this one wants initials and the other one doesn't, but I can see that this has more liability to it.
Well, I think they both, well, I guess you're right. I mean, green wouldn't have such a liability, but I think you should have your seller initial regardless on that other
Yeah,
one.
it's weird that it's not there, but I
Yeah.
feel like some houses would be able to fill out a lot of this, but just not have any idea, right? Even if the seller's filling it out, right? Knowing about those radiuses, it's so hard to ascertain that information, but
Mhm.
this just goes into, you just upload this into the supplements.
Yep. Again, if on your listing input sheet in the MLS, you put some of the accessibility info in there, you also have to upload this into the supplements. Any questions about that? Any discomfort with using these forms? Because we haven't been, honestly, I've seen very few mark green or accessibility. And I think we should where they apply because it does set your listing apart for folks. And as we are aging and living longer, I think it makes sense for us to include this information.
And if I understand you right, Jen, you're saying if a home has a heat pump, we can list it as green.
Yeah. That's a green feature. And I would say, given our current building standards, at least on our newer homes, you're gonna have at least 5 or 6 of those features from the green form. Like most all of our new appliances are Energy Star certified.
Right.
So we're just not taking advantage of it.
These are good forms. I've never seen them before.
Excuse me. Okay, I'm gonna move on. So this is not so much marketing and features as more of if you've got a seller who has, for some reason, say you've got a pro football player or Taylor Swift wants to list her home and she does not want her name disclosed. You would use this form where seller info is undisclosed. They do have to give you. Well, actually, I'm thinking of a different form. They don't have to tell you why. They're just telling you, I want my name confidential. I had a buyer once and he was an FBI agent, and it turns out that when you're an FBI agent or a Secret Service agent, they're very careful about disclosing their names on purchases, so he worked with the escrow and title company to strike his name from the tax records. So there are ways to keep your name confidential from that. We had a situation recently where it was a domestic violence situation. And she did not want her name disclosed or her address disclosed, and we're gonna go into that form, but this is a case where a domestic violence situation, they have to be careful, or a stalking situation. I've heard of a couple of those since I moved to Washington. So this is one of the forms you use to document that the seller does not want their name included anywhere in public.
So question on this, the second paragraph down there, seller requests that seller's name or seller's residence location or both is not there. So essentially, if you go into the MLS, the information on the owner, the tenant, all of that stuff is gone. And if you make an offer and documents are getting signed, that's where you would learn the name of the person as a buyer.
Yes.
Okay, so this is just no one who's shopping for the home is going to know who you are, but whoever buys the home will find out.
Yeah, because you have to use their legal name on the documents themselves.
Okay,
And
got
if they're that concerned about it, they will probably ask for an NDA in addition to the contract forms. I don't think our domestic violence situation took it that far. They were like, as soon as it goes under contract, she just didn't want it reported publicly with her name on it. So we worked with the title company, we worked with, escrow to make sure that this was not disclosed. And you do have to work with Northwest MLS. We'll see this on the next form. Let me go straight to, I think it's you. Yeah, so when they request that you do not disclose their address or that you're working with an unpublished listing, we explain that I'm kind of combining these two, and it's not exactly fair to do so, but if they don't want their address disclosed or they don't want you to publish the listing in the MLS, we have to disclose to them that the Northwest MLS rules require us to submit the listing, including the address and the tax ID. But the seller is directing us not to advertise on the internet to the public. And again, this applied to the domestic violence situation. That the address is not mapped on the internet, that appointments are required. Maybe there's no key box on the property, etc. We have to work with the Northwest MLS to get the property uploaded properly. So they can say, I do not want my address or tax ID number disclosed. I understand that that could impact the number of buyers that view it and could get in the way of selling the property because fewer people are seeing the information. And see if this is approved, Northwest MLS staff must input the listing. We can't do it ourselves. And they do have to disclose why the seller is making this request. So the most common reasons I've heard is a domestic violence situation, a stalker situation, or a celebrity. further.
I have a
the-
couple. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, no, go ahead.
Okay, so if you scroll up a little bit, the first request is essentially in the norm, we upload a listing and the integration with all of the listing sites, boom, it goes up, right? Listing matches the mapping for that site. Now, in this
Correct.
situation, you're requesting that the property address doesn't go in, the NWMLS uploads it specially.
Right.
Does that still integrate to the listing sites? Will people see it if they look at Port Townsend, but there's no address, it just exists as a listing?
Correct. It won't show the tax ID and it won't show the property address.
But it will show, the property will exist, so some buyers will see it if they search, let's say, Port Townsend looking between 4 and 600K. That house shows up because it's mapped in Port Townsend, but not with an address.
Correct.
So in theory, in this, let's say, domestic violence situation, if the abuser is on Zillow and sees that listing pop up and recognizes it, that's just a potential that it might happen, but
Correct.
you're still marketing the property because you want to sell it. Now,
Correct.
in the lower box, I'm very opposed to pocket listings and all that kind of stuff, but that's subjective. In this situation, if I have a listing where someone's like, you can't let anyone know that it's a thing,
Right.
the only reason to put it in the NWMLS is to go by the books, right? Like if I'm not advertising this property and I'm just talking to people and saying, hey, I have this listing, let me know if you have a buyer,
Right.
you essentially would be able to do that and then just put it in as a sale without having to do this, but you should do this.
Yeah. So in addition, if they want to take it a step further, like in a domestic violence situation, they don't want it shown in public to anyone. Because the likelihood is, well, not always, but the likelihood is your abuser knows where you live and is watching. And so you're not gonna want to show the house. You're not gonna want to have it published anywhere. Not on the internet, not in the Northwest MLS, nowhere. So that's truly a pocket listing, and it severely impacts how many people can view that property or even gonna know about it.
Yeah, the difference between the two situations is it's very interesting because it's so drastic, but also doing the first one, I just don't understand. I mean, I get the application, but it just confuses me because if it goes on the listing site anyway, why are we not putting the address on there? Because it's already on the listing site, someone could find it in theory.
Well, it prevents people from driving by. I mean, you're not talking about now you're talking about a confidentiality privacy issue versus an abusive situation where
Yes.
they don't want people driving by their house because it's on the MLS and the address is shown.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, that makes sense.
So again, these forms are meant to be developed to apply to a wide variety of circumstances. I'm using the most restrictive one, given a domestic violence situation or a stalker. But if you're a celebrity or you just have a seller who wants privacy and doesn't want people driving by their house because their address is out there. More and more people are concerned about safety and privacy these days.
What's the title of this form?
This is the 7U seller's request for undisclosed address or unpublished listing. So it's a way, because we are, as members of the Northwest MLS, we are required to put our properties in there. So this gives us the ability to not get fined for abusing the rules when we've got a seller who definitely does not want something published. I know there have been some folks that didn't publish it at the request of the seller, but did not use this form and got in trouble because they were breaking the rules. You have to be able to show that this is what the seller is requesting me to do. Because our clients come first, right? So we've got to have a tool that we can use to give them what they need for whatever reason without breaking the rules ourselves. So that's why this form was created. if you do have a seller who's insisting that they don't want their property published in the Northwest MLS, make sure they understand how much more difficult it is and understand why they're asking you to do it. Because it could be a misperception of the situation. You know, some sellers are really paranoid, some are really worried about safety, and so a lot of times you can talk them through their concerns and be able to get them comfortable with publishing. I mean, if they really want to sell, the best way to do that is to put it out to as many people as possible. So be prepared to have those discussions. And have you ever run into this with a seller? Someone who's so concerned with privacy, they just didn't want it published at all?
No, actually, that would make it a pocket listing.
It would.
Yeah, I've never had this.
Yeah, I've known of 3 or 4 in Port Townsend that just did not want it on the MLS. But it not only drastically limits how many buyers are gonna see it, it also limits a fair market value. Cause you might just have somebody that comes in and lowballs you and you take it because you're so desperate to sell. But it definitely could impact the sales price. Any other questions on this one?
Who were the celebrities that you helped and were they nice?
No comment.
How many NDAs have you signed? Out of here, asking for a friend. Okay, that's my only question.
Good try, though. Okay, I'm skipping around a little bit. Let me go back to 7F. Because I felt that those two were pretty common. So I don't know if you all have ever seen in the MLS comments like buyer's agent must be present at inspections and all showings or compensation will be reduced. Have you seen that? That usually happens because there's an area where we're seeing a lot of outside agents coming over, like from Seattle agents coming over and working in an area that they're not familiar with. And then that buyer's agent will call me as the listing agent going, I'm just so busy. I just can't make it over there to let the inspector in. Would you mind opening the door and letting the inspector in? I'm not going to talk about how that is not representing your buyer appropriately, but it has happened. So, legal came up with this form where if that is the scenario and your seller, it does a disservice to your seller too often. That they have to document what conditions the buyer broker has to meet to earn the full amount. So I know a lot of people have probably put the comments in without having this Form 7F done. But if you're gonna do a variable offer on buyer broker compensation, you should always include this form. So you talk about which property, of course. You talk about, okay, they have to attend every showing, they have to attend every inspection, they have to do the final walkthrough, whatever conditions you want to put on the buyer broker to earn the full amount. And again, this is at the firm level. So if the buyer broker has a agent in their firm who covers for them sometimes, then that's fine. But if they're asking other people outside of their firm, like the listing agent, to do something, that's not exactly kosher. So if they do not meet those conditions, then the firm compensation shall be 1%. That's the one I've seen most often, but it's generally a lesser amount than what was offered in the MLS.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
The first one is, if you scroll to the top, it talks about variable compensation.
Mhm.
In the variable compensation, is that built into the offer because this form exists? Or are we talking about variable on the fact that the listing agent gets to choose, or the seller gets to choose what it's going to be and is more involved with that now?
Yeah, you have to disclose it up front that it's variable. And you have to disclose it in the MLS before they ever show the house, so this is part of your input. You need to put it in the remarks. I don't think there's a separate field for the lower compensation, but we usually put it in the agent remarks.
So the variable compensation for the buyer's broker, would that be tied exclusively to this? Because like I've seen, very short amount of time here, but I've seen in the listing, like buyer's compensation, submit it with offer, right? Submit what you want with your offer.
Mhm.
That's not variable compensation, right?
Right, but you could include this, if they had said, submit with offer. You could also at that point do this and say, we'll negotiate your ask. But to get that ask, we expect you to do these things. And if you don't do those things, then we're gonna take it down to 1% or 0.5% or whatever. Does that make sense?
So is it, yeah, sorry, I had a quick interruption there. So is it only variable if this form exists, or are there other reasons it would be variable outside of this?
Well, where else would you document a variable compensation?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you'd have, just like, we have, if there's a form for that, you have to use it. So if there's an
Okay.
intention that the buyer broker must meet a minimum amount of activities to earn their commission. And if they don't, it's reduced to this. This is the form you need to use.
And I guess, Jen, just, because I'm a little confused, when do you introduce this form? When you're setting up the listing or
When
when you're
you're- yes,
negotiating
When
the
you're,
contract
Yeah.
for purchase?
well, if, because of the way the compensation works now, if the seller has elected to say, I want buyer brokers to bring their offer of compensation at offer time. That way we are not offering anything when we publish the listing, right? So if you have not offered, you want them to negotiate at closing, I'm sorry, negotiate at offer for their compensation.
Mhm.
And then this would come into play at the time you receive an offer. I would go ahead and have the seller fill this out as part of their listing. Have the discussion with them on what does it mean for a buyer broker to earn their compensation.
And I'm just thinking about that section on your listing agreement. There's really two, if they check, bring your request with the offer, or if they check, no compensation is offered, this form could come into play, right?
Correct.
Okay.
What are some of the other tasks you might see down there, right? Attending an inspection.
All showings, all walkthroughs. Those are the most common I've seen. Showings, inspections, walkthroughs. I mean, basically, we're asking them to represent their buyer. If they want to earn their compensation, they need to represent their buyer. They need to be present with their buyer.
So is this something you would say? Because like thinking about those two initial ones, informational only, accessibility and green stuff, right? So if you're sitting there and you're like, hey, here's all these forms, let's fill them out. Here's your seller's disclosure. Here's this, here's that. Is this something where, hey, it's a good standard procedure for me to show you this form. Here's the green one. Here's the accessibility one. Here's this. Do you want to fill out a form 7F? It's not required, right? But should that be something that we present to them in hopes to create more accountability?
I would, because it's in their best interest. One of the ways that we discuss buyer broker compensation with our seller is that by the buyer having qualified, good representation, it solves some of the seller's problems later on. It solves potential problems from occurring because you've got an experienced agent on the other side managing the buyer's presentation. And
Okay.
so we've had sellers be upset going, well, what's going on? This, because, you're disclosing who's on site. Or you're disclosing, yeah, I'm having to come over and open the door for an inspector or a contractor for the buyer broker because they weren't available. And so you're walking that line of what's in the best interest of your seller client. And at some point, I've had sellers go, well, you're doing all the work here. Why isn't the buyer broker coming in and meeting the inspector? Why am I paying this guy? I'm offering compensation to this guy and he's not even showing up. So by having the discussion up front, you're not trying to make anybody look bad, but your seller is paying compensation to a buyer broker, potentially. It's all negotiable. But if he's paying for the buyer broker compensation, there should be a certain amount of expectation there, right?
Yeah. So the seller's protecting the idea of you doing more of the work because someone has to get it done. And if there's an agent in Seattle who's asking you to let the inspector in or go to the contractor, you're protecting your time as a listing agent by getting this filled out. If you get this filled out and you put it into the MLS where it says buyer broker compensation 2.5%, what would that say there? Variable?
You check the variable box. And you would put in agent remarks what it would be reduced to, because we have to disclose compensation now. So in the broker remarks, you would say, if you do not do these things, your commission will be reduced to this.
Okay. Very interesting form.
And I would be careful. I mean, it's not really protecting us as the listing agent. It's your seller is paying a buyer broker compensation and he should be earning that compensation. Because the whole point is it's going to smooth the buyer side of the transaction when you've got someone who's qualified and involved. If I'm opening the door for an inspector as the seller's agent, that automatically creates a higher liability because I could do or say something that influences the inspector to the detriment of the buyer. And now we've got a potential lawsuit situation. So even though it's probably in the best interest to my seller to keep the schedule going and let the inspector in, it's also raising a whole area of liability that we really don't want. Does that all make sense? So I would make this part of the dialogue. Not to protect myself per se, but to say, all right, you are in essence paying compensation to the buyer broker. What do you expect that buyer broker to do as a result of that compensation?
And you would pretty much so go by how the seller, the owner responds. I mean, if you
Exactly.
have a seller who comes out and flat out says, I don't want some broker coming in willy-nilly doing nothing, and this is when you would bring this into the offer.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so on the listing agreement or on the listing, the MLS listing, this would be noted in the agent's remarks.
There's a checkbox that says variable compensation. And so you would make sure that that box is checked, yes or no. And you would put the details around what's expected for that compensation in the agent remarks.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions on that?
Jen, what if the listing agent forgets to put that verbiage in for us to see where the compensation is on the MLS? But
Well,
it's attached to it, you know what I mean?
yeah, have they checked? Well, number one, I would upload this form into the supplements. And have they, in this example you're giving, have they checked the variable compensation? Or not?
Let's say well, if they do check the variable compensation, will it just, it will feed onto the compensation that is being offered, that verbiage, correct?
It won't automatically feed it. You have to put it in.
Right, but that's how it will present on the page.
Yeah, so if you're a buyer's agent and you see the variable compensation box checked, I would be having a conversation. If you don't see this form and you don't see any comments, I would be having a conversation with the listing agent going, okay, what is the variable compensation? What are the expectations there?
Gotcha.
Any other questions about that one? Okay. I think we've covered. Oh, no, we've got this last one to do. So this one talks about, I'm sure we've all had sellers who, I don't want to show the house during Christmas. I've got family coming in. I don't want any showings interrupting our family time. So this form is what you should be using. Now, I know probably a lot of us have just gone into showing time and restricted it, but technically you've got to have it documented. So it's got to be at least more than 24 hours for temporarily suspending showings. So you document your time period here. And of course, by selling that, by the seller signing this, they are saying, I understand that I may miss out on a buyer over Christmas or whatever that time period is. But I still want you to do it. So it could potentially impact the sale of the property. So that's what this is for. Any questions about that?
Seems like a pretty straightforward one.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
And you use this when it's like, you could use this multiple times. Let's say the listing was up for Thanksgiving and
Mm-hmm,
Hanukkah, right? Let's just say
right,
you would
yeah.
use it once for then and then once again.
Yeah,
Okay. If it's more than 24 hours that you're blocking it off of,
correct.
but it's probably used like 10% of the time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, but, oh yeah, Miss Seller, I will just block it off at showing time. We won't accept any appointments during that time. But you do,
Yeah.
and again, there's always a reason a form has been created. And so someone probably said to the agent, hey, I don't want you to show it over Christmas. And then they got upset because the neighbor's house sold and theirs didn't. And so they probably said, well, you didn't tell me it would have impacted my potential sale. And so, some of these seem so ridiculous, but the fact is somebody got sued. And so they created a form to make sure all parties were communicated clearly with. So. And I think that's all I've got today. Unless you have any other questions around these listing amendments that we're not using often enough.
This is so great. I've obviously never had a listing before, but knowing about all these
Yes.
forms that are potentially can be used before I get my first listing is so beneficial. Thank you so
Yep,
much.
you're welcome.
These forms are awesome. I didn't even know, like I said earlier, that they existed.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you
agree.
very much.
you're
Very
welcome.
helpful, Jean. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So next week, I'm sure we'll have to do 2 or 3 sessions on this, but I'm gonna cover addendums to contracts that aren't used very often either. And there are a lot more of them. So on on the next Monday forums, we'll start going through those.
Okay,
Okay? All
thank
right,
you.
guys, have a good day.
Thanks, Jen.
See you later.
See ya.
Bye.
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 Thank you.